Animator, director, and producer David Block didn't even consider animation as a career path until he got to college. Then, as a freshman, he saw a reissue of Fantasia and knew immediately what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. David started taking art classes, which led to art schools, which led him ultimately to Hollywood, California, where he was soon working for Chuck Jones and animation icon Abe Lebetow. After a stint assisting Art Babbitt on Raggedy Ann and Andy, which Dave describes as a less than totally happy experience, Mr. Block began a long and productive association with the Walt Disney Company, first as an animator on The Fox and the Hound, Mickey's Christmas Carol, The Black Cauldron, and The Great Mouse Detective, then as a director and producer on a long string of Disney television animation titles, everything from DuckTales to Gummy Bears to Bonkers to Kim Possible. Mr. Block is today back at Walt Disney Animation Studios, where he is again working as an animator. We spoke on March 25th at the Animation Guild. We're here today talking to David Block about his long career in animation. And David, how did you decide that what you really wanted to do with your life is animate, direct, produce, but all centered around animation? What started the whole process for you?
In 1970, I graduated from high school, and I went off to a liberal arts four-year state university in Ohio. I grew up in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And went to Bowling Green State University, which is up in like the northwest corner of Ohio. It's really near Toledo.
Yeah.
And I was an American history major.
Oh, okay.
Had never taken any formal art training all through high school, nothing.
You didn't draw in art? You didn't draw in high school?
I doodled, but I had no formal art training. Never taken an art class all the way through high school, nothing. So,
so how did the bug bite you?
Well, so I'm an American history major. One day I have the day off. The movie Fantasia had come to little downtown Bowling Green, and I had never seen it before. So I went to a matinee, and I had what I could only consider a religious experience watching Fantasia. It absolutely had me spellbound, and I knew that my American history major was like a pre-law major.
So you were heading for the legal profession?
Well, yeah. My father was a doctor. My other relatives were in sales. I had no idea. I had no clue as to what I was going to do. But law, secure, stable, blah, blah, blah.
But get the Bachelor of Arts degree and go on from there.
That's right. And was I committed to being a lawyer? Absolutely not. But I did like American history, so it seemed it was a stopping off place, something to do. So I came out of that screening and said, that's what I want to do.
Just like that?
Just like that.
So you said, David, you better go get yourself some art classes.
Yeah.
And you were
I
like,
came,
what?
I came, I was a child. I was so much a child of the '60s.
Yeah.
That the idea of entertaining children as a career was extremely appealing to me. I thought, and I had an incredible childhood, really a great childhood, and where the Disney movies played a major part in my entertainment level, and Peter Pan was a huge influence on my childhood, The Boy Who Never Grows Up.
Yeah.
So,
but it didn't provide you with a religious experience that Fantasia did.
No, it didn't. So I literally came back and called my parents and told them I was changing my major to art for the next quarter,
and their reaction?
And that I was going to be an animator. There was a lot of silence on the other end of the phone, and they didn't take me seriously. They weren't angry. I had really understanding parents and really patient parents, but they they said it was kind of like, okay. And so I did change my major to art.
Yeah.
And the first two classes I could take, were all like Art 101, Art 102.
Yeah.
And I was just such an open book for whatever the teacher wanted to instruct me on. I had no preconceived, no one had put anything in my head yet. So I was like a
You didn't even
sponge.
have a drawing style. You had nothing.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, watched the Flintstones, watched Top Cat, watched Huckleberry Hound, and any of those movies, any of those TV shows, I found I could draw those characters with pretty little effort. That was not hard. So, if I was in school and somebody said, "Hey, Dave, can you draw me da 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 da?" and I could. That's all I knew about my drawing ability.
Yeah.
So I'm taking these classes. I'm getting A's on everything. So a lot of encouragement there.
Positive reinforcement.
Positive reinforcement. So the end of the year comes, end of my freshman year. My parents come up to pick me up. And I inform them I'm not coming back next year. I'm going to find an art school and I'm going to enroll in it. And my father, who's a doctor, said, "Well, let's make one thing perfectly clear. Until you get an art school to accept you, you will be coming back here." No, I won't be coming back here.
Oh, you got into an argument.
Oh, huge argument. All the way home from Bowling Green, which is like a 4-hour drive. All the way home. So the summer was spent. By the time I had left Bowling Green, I
You're
had
like 18 or 19 at this point, right?
19. So by the time I left Bowling Green, I had my first life drawing class. And I spent the summer putting together my first portfolio to submit to any art school that I could. So we found, I knew I wanted to be an animator. Well, in 1970, now we're in 71.
Right.
The number of books on animation you could count on one hand. I think
Oh,
there
yeah.
were only 3.
Walter Foster art book.
Well, there was that. I don't even count that, but actually that's a pretty good book.
Yeah.
There was one called Fundamentals of Animation. I can't remember, but Hallison Batchelor had one of the 3 or 4 books that was out there. But you're right, the Preston Blair book was there. And
Everybody used it.
Everybody used
it.
But the number of schools that taught animation or had anything on animation were really slim.
Yeah.
Really slim.
Yeah.
Yale, I had one. Had some classes. Rhode Island School of Design had a couple of classes. Cal Arts, of course, didn't exist yet. It was sort of in that transition between Chenard and becoming Cal
Right.
Arts. So nothing was going on there.
And they didn't even have an animation program at first.
Well, I didn't even know that, but and Cal Arts, anything in California could have been on another planet. That's how far away California felt growing up in Ohio.
Yeah.
So I found a school called the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. It was the oldest privately owned art academy in the country. Started in 1800 and something.
Yeah.
And Paul Conrad, the Pulitzer
LA
Prize
Times
political
cartoonist.
cartoonist, he had attended it, and Walt Disney had attended it for like 1 nanosecond, because Walt spent some of his growing up in Chicago and actually went there. And in his biography, they mentioned the place. And they, according to the catalog, had an animation program, not just classes, a program. So I just went, well, that's got to be the place. That's where I'm going. So I
That's
put
great.
together a portfolio, and we went up there, and lo and behold, I got accepted. Now, what I didn't know at the time, I found out not long after I got accepted, was that private academies, especially this one, was going to take almost anybody. If you could hold the frickin' pencil,
That's right.
you were going to get in.
And you could fog a mirror.
That's right. they needed your money. It was all about that. So I get in, and I remember, standing in line to sign up for my first bunch of classes. We were on a semester system, and God, everybody had been taking classes. They were, all through high school they had taken classes. These kids had, so much more under their belt than I had.
Yeah.
And but I'm very competitive, and I just thought, just give me some time. I'll catch you. I'll pass you. And so I get into the program, and the program is headed up by a man named Art Huda. He was the entire program. They had one teacher, and Art Huda.
Catalog wasn't quite on it.
Oh God, no. Art Huda had been an assistant to Bill Roberts, who was an animator on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And before Bill Roberts had gone out to California and joined Disney, he had done something in the Chicago area as an animator. And that was the extent of Art Huda's knowledge of animation.
Being an in-betweener or assistant.
Exactly. So after about 6 months, so I knew I wasn't going to get much from Art. Art didn't have a lot to impart to me. So I was reading those 3 books religiously that I now own, The Fundamentals of Animation, Preston Blair book, and so on. And after about 6 months, Art said, "I have nothing more I can teach you." And so I went to the dean, and I said, "This is the situation. I need to learn. Art doesn't have anything more to give me, so I'll make a deal with you. I'm going to work on my animation. I'm not coming in for class. And at the end of the semester, I will show you what I've got, and you can grade me on it as you see fit. But I'm not coming in anymore. I'm going to work back at my dormitory, and once a month, I'm going to go home. I'm going to build an animation stand back in Cincinnati. I'm going to go home, fly back there every so often, shoot my animation, and at the end of the semester, I'll show you what I got."
And he said, okay.
And he said, "Okay."
Make sure your parents' checks don't bounce.
That's right. So that's what I did, and I was completely self-taught. God damn, I made a lot of mistakes, but I really learned the hard way. And after 2 years of being at Chicago,
So you kept up to sort of self-tutoring for 2 years?
I did for 2 years. I knew that Art Center was my next goal. Cal Arts was still didn't have their act together yet. They had not become what they were going to become.
Right.
And Art Center, which was like, on the East Coast, it's Rhode Island School of Design. On the West Coast, it was Art Center.
Right. A lot of people went there.
A lot of people went there. And so my portfolio was strong enough to get into Art Center. And they had animation, according to the catalog.
That's right.
So
You're
I
to the point
enrolled.
where you don't trust catalogs.
Exactly. Well, I learned again. I got burned again with their catalog. So I came out here. Art Center was up on 3rd Street in Los Angeles, almost in the Fairfax district.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And right outside of Hancock Park. And so I enrolled there as an illustration major, because you couldn't enroll in an animation major until your 3rd year. So I took my first semester, but I really had blinders on for becoming an animator. I didn't want to be an illustrator. So I had cut deals with the administration in Chicago. Now I'm still trying to cut deals with Art Center. And man, did they! Oh well, they were a lot tougher. That was a much tougher crowd, and they made me jump through a lot of hoops. After my first semester, I really tried to break down the barriers and see if they would let me take at least an animation class in the 2nd semester, and just to get to talk to the head of the animation department was really hard. A lot of red
schedule an
tape.
appointment.
Oh, and then some. So I finally, to make a long story short, I finally got in to talk to him, and I brought him the films I had done in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And he saw them, and so I'm about to start my second semester, and he said, "Well, you've gone as far as we go here." And
Haven't you heard this tale before?
yeah, so I left. I drove home, and informed my parents I was dropping out of Art Center.
And this is after how long? You were there
One
for
semester.
One semester.
One semester.
Jeez.
So they went, okay. They sort of trusted me in that I was definitely seemed driven, in
You were
a career.
focused.
I was very focused.
But so far, no degrees out of any of these schools,
Nothing.
right?
Zero.
You're
Zilch.
just, yeah, okay, so
So
they probably wanted to see some Parchment O'Rooney.
maybe. Well, they were certainly spending. Art Center was expensive, very expensive.
Yeah.
So I then got a hold of the catalog for Otis Art Institute.
Oh, okay.
And Otis Art Institute had a teacher named Alan Zaslov. And his
Oh.
credentials were that he was an animator, freelance animator. He was teaching full time, but he was an
A
animator.
UPA animator.
And the light bulb went on, and I went over to him, and I read his bio where it said he had gone to school at Chenard, and I knew what Chenard was, and Chenard was no more, but anyway, and I said, "Did you ever take classes with Don Graham?" Because I had read in the Don Graham book, Composing Pictures, he had a chapter about animation, and he had, of course, been the teacher that teach all the greats the better things about art and so on and so forth. And he said,
Oh, yeah.
he said, I took Don Graham's class several times at Chenard. He was my mentor. I said, good enough for me.
Perfect.
So Alan taught a life drawing class, and I enrolled in the class, and I was taking it twice a week, and I was in there for one reason and one reason only. I wanted him to open doors for me, and he knew that. And so anytime I brought up the subject of animation, he just shut me down. It was like, are you here to learn to draw, or are you here to get a freebie? And I finally gave up and started focusing on the class and started doing really well in the class, really well. And at the end of the semester, I was taking him twice a week, maybe more, maybe 4 times a week. He stopped by my desk, and I knew I had done well, and he said, "Call this guy." And on the piece of paper was a guy's name by the name of Ben Washam,
Oh, Ben Washam.
and his phone number.
Warner Brothers premier animator.
Premier animator. So I called Benny. Benny was teaching a private class in his home for free. And it was open only to people who had been referred to him by people he trusted and respected. So Benny lived up in Mount Olympus in Hollywood. You know where that is? Up in the hill there. And I showed up there. I continued to take Alan's classes. I didn't stop taking Alan's classes, but I started going to Benny's class, which was every Wednesday night. And Benny, for those that don't know, was a top animator for Chuck Jones, and had been. He was just ever so slightly below the height of Ken Harris, who was Chuck Jones's #1 animator. He was the top of the food chain, and Benny had stuck with Chuck through thick and thin, and years, and sometimes even co-directed some of Chuck's things, and now Benny was he was working for Chuck whenever Chuck needed him, but his full-time job,
because Chuck was not
doing
like
things
he had been.
regularly.
Right.
He would get primetime specials, but it wasn't a continuous thing. So Benny had a full-time job working for Jay Ward, doing Captain Crunch commercials. He was doing all of them, and he was teaching this class. So I go up there, and there's about 6 of us in the class. Milt Gray was one of them.
Oh, yeah.
A guy named Ed Verreau was another one. Ed Verreau would go on to be an art director in live action movies. And Gwen Wetzler was another one.
Yeah.
And there was a black guy, and I can't think of his name, but anyway, it was a very small group of people. And Benny would give us these phenomenally fun assignments. He was a great teacher. He had a great bedside manner. He would tell unbelievably funny stories of the great days at Warner Brothers. And we would do these tests and learn I mean, I had never had a teacher before, really, so it was phenomenal. And he would get the scene shot at Jay Ward Studios on 16 millimeter film, and then we would go up to his studio was down below his house, underneath, and then we would go upstairs to the living room and on a 16 millimeter projector run these pencil tests, and he would critique them, and we'd move on. And
how long did this whole process take? Were you there for a year? Were you there for 6 months?
I was there for about a year, to the point where I got to be like, oh, he was much more than a mentor. He was like an uncle. We would have lunch a lot, and I just, I was like his nephew. I just loved the man so much, and I was just learning so much so fast, and the carrot, he had a carrot that he held out in front of all 5 of us. And that was, if you get good enough, I'll arrange an interview for you at Chuck Jones. Because you could not get in the front door at Chuck Jones. Chuck Jones was the second hardest studio to get a job at after Disney.
Yeah.
He was doing only CBS specials. Of course, he had this reputation, and you just could not get in the front door.
This is what, 73, 72?
This is 70. I met Benny in 73. So by the time, by the
So it's
time
74 by the time.
by the time I had been with Benny about a year, and I won the carrot.
You were the guy out of that group.
Out of that group who got the interview. So I went up there, and Chuck was in a high-rise office building, like a skyscraper, basically,
Yeah.
on the corner of Sunset and Vine. It's
Yeah.
still there.
Oh, yeah.
And at the top, there was a very famous bar. I can't remember the name of the bar, but Walt Kelly had gotten drunk there many, many times, and it was in the Hollywood circles, that was a famous bar. And so I went in with my portfolio and went up to the office, and the secretary is there, and I think I'm going to get to meet Chuck Jones. And she says, "Let me have your portfolio." I give it to her, and she says, "We'll call you when we're done with it." And it's like,
You'll meet Chuck Jones later.
you don't know how much later. So
So how long did they have your portfolio?
about 4 days, 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And they call, and I go back, and they said, "Chuck liked your portfolio very much. We just don't have any openings right now." Okay. So now it's summertime, and I'm looking for a job. And it's the summer of 74.
Okay.
And I now know from history, 74 in the animation industry was a really bad year.
Yeah, it was.
And I'm calling, I didn't even bother calling Disney. That was out of the question. But I'm calling Ralph Bakshi. I'm calling all the little boutique studios, the Bill Melendez's and all those studios. And everyone says, "Are you in the union?" No, I can't be in the union unless I work for 6 weeks at a union job. Well, we can't hire you unless you're in the union. And so it's this catch-22. How the hell am I ever going to get in the union if you don't hire me? So I went around and around. But over the course of that summer, I did 2 things. Well, two great things happened. One was I met June Foray.
Oh, yeah.
June Foray had this organization called ASIFA, which was really in its early years. And she had a huge animation cell sale that raised money for the organization out at her home once a year. And I volunteered to mat and frame all the really high-end stuff that the ASIFA organization had in their collection that they were going to auction off and sell. So that way I at least had a way of meeting people and doing something over the summer, because I wasn't finding a job. So I would go out to June's house in La Cañada, and it was a gorgeous home with a big pool and a pool house and everything, and I would sit there and mat her cells. And eventually, when the cell sale came along, some of the greats came out to this affair. I met Bob Clampett, and so on. Chuck didn't show up, though.
Chuck didn't show up, but a lot of the other movers.
They really did.
You probably weren't that far from Frank and Ollie's houses. Because
Well,
she was in
anyway.
La Cañada.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, not La Cañada, Canoga Park. She lives in Canoga Park.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah,
she's out.
She's way out there. So the other great thing that happened was I called for an interview at a place called Cascade Studios. Cascade was on Santa Monica Boulevard in Hollywood, and they did commercials.
Yeah.
So I go out there, and mind you, everyone I'm interviewing with, I'm 22, 23 years old, whatever I was. They're like 65. I mean, the age difference was just tremendous.
Oh, yeah.
So I meet this guy, I'm showing him my portfolio, and he goes, "Well, you got some nice stuff here. Let's go show it to Tex." And I'm going, no, can't be. He's got to be dead. He invented Bugs Bunny, for Christ's sake. He's got to be dead. So we walk down this dark hallway, door opens up, there's Tex Avery. I was just, it was like a Tex Avery take. My mouth just hung there. And spent the next half an hour showing him my portfolio. Nicest guy in the world. It was just, it was like, I just met God. So that was really cool. Anyway, fast forward, I don't get a job all summer. I work at June's house, but nothing more. And Comic-Con had just begun. They were in their second year. And Comic-Con was not at all what it is now. It was not even close.
El Cortez Hotel.
Yeah. It was down in San Diego, but it was just for comic book geeks. When we went down there, it was a big room with a lot of boxes of old comic books, and that was it.
Folding tables.
It was really
Bare bones.
nothing, very bare bones. So Chuck Jones, it was announced Chuck Jones was going to give a talk at Comic-Con. And I went, well, I sure didn't get to meet him in my interview, so I'm going to go meet him now. I'm going to go see him talk. And so my brother and I drove down to San Diego together, and we hear him talk. It was a great talk. And afterwards, I go up, and he's up on a platform. It's like a stage. He's
Right.
on a stage.
Sure.
It's like 2 steps up, and then he's got one of those little lectern things, and he's talking, and they had a screen behind him, and he's showing movies. So I go up afterwards, and I say, hello, Mr. Jones. I know you don't remember me, but 3 months ago, I was a student of Ben Washam's, and I came in and left my portfolio off. And he goes, and I quote, "Oh, I remember that portfolio. Had some good stuff in it. Would you like to start work on Monday?"
That's not bad. Probably wouldn't have said that if you hadn't gone up.
That's right. So I was absolutely stunned and started going, that would be great, And I start backing up, completely forgetting that I'm up on the stage, and wiped out in front of Chuck Jones. But anyway, I started work on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
He was producing a CBS special called Rikki Tikki Tavi,
Oh, yeah.
which became a real famous primetime animated thing. And I was an in-betweener, and my teachers were Tom Ferreter, Retta Davidson, and Bob Tyler. Three of the top assistant animators in our business. Hal Ambro was animating. George Nicholas was animating. Benny was animating at home. And so they took me, the three of them, took me under their wing and absolutely sat on me. I couldn't move without, if I did anything that was a bad work habit, if I did anything that
They'd
wasn't
immediately corrected
it, and just hammered me. And Chuck, after 2 weeks, said I was getting $208 a week. After 2 weeks, Chuck said, I have no more money to pay you in the budget. I have to let you go. Well, boy, did I cry. I was just devastated. But after those 2 weeks, I made the same circuit of phone calls that I had made just weeks before. Everybody wanted me. All I had to say was I had worked for Chuck Jones, and it was like, when can you start? It was unbelievable. So I had gotten word through Retta that there was a studio that I hadn't even looked at before called Levito Hansen Films. Abe Levito was an animator for Chuck's who had become a director. He had actually directed Phantom Toll Booth, I think, and he had co-directed Gay Paris for Chuck.
Yeah, sure.
And so I went over there, and of course Chuck sent me a recommendation, and Abe hired me on the spot. Abe was doing mostly commercials. He had a contract with General Mills to do Frankenberry, Count Chocula, and Boo Berry. Count Chocula. It was those cereals.
Right.
Yeah.
All of the flavored cereals.
And he was doing the Charlie the Tuna Starkist commercials.
So he had a full plate.
He had a full plate. He was also doing spots for Sesame Street. Carl Bell was the production manager.
Yeah.
A gal named Lee Kent was the editor.
Yeah.
And Abe got only top people to come in freelance and animate for him. So Hal Ambro was animating for him, and a guy in particular named Irv Anderson was animating for him. And Irv would come in and actually work in-house. And so the first spot, and maybe even the second spot, I was an in-betweener, and Retta was the assistant working out from her home. And Retta was fast. God, she was fast. And I remember asking her, because I would pick up work from her home, and say, how are you so fast? I can't get over how fast you are. And she said, you don't make mistakes. Mistakes cost time. Or, just to turn that pencil around with the eraser and rub something out takes time.
So do it right the first time.
Do it right the
first time. Which is often easier said than done.
Well, because she and Tyler and Ferreter had given me so many good work habits, by the third spot, they were letting me do some assistant work. Abe was unbelievable. Abe was willing to try you out before you were ready to try it out. And for one thing, I was working, my pay was, of course, less than an assistant. So if he could get me to do assistant work, it was to his advantage.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So before very long, Abe was saying, let's try you out on assistant work. And it worked out. And so I became the in-house assistant for Abe. And I was meeting some real old-timers. And I was called the kid. I wasn't Dave, I wasn't David, I was the kid.
You were probably the youngest one in the studio.
Oh, by far and away. And they would take me to lunches a lot. And there was a great place that's long gone. And everyone I've talked to, other than the old timers, say, I've never heard of this place. It was called The Shack. And it was over on either Cahuenga or Cole, right in the Hollywood area. And Abe Levito's studio was in the original Walter Lantz building, the original Walter Lantz Productions.
And where were they located? I always thought they were at Universal.
No, they were right in the heart
lot.
of Hollywood on Seward, between Santa Monica and Melrose. I can't remember what the cross street was, but we were on the Seward was one of the corners, and it was at that time the second largest animation studio next to Disney. It was really big, and
All those commercials.
so we were on the second floor, and the first floor, nothing had been moved from when Walter Lantz had a full-fledged studio. So I could go down there, and the camera stand was still there. It was an Oxbury, and in the camera room, all these rooms were large. In the camera room, the Woody Woodpecker cells were still there in stack folder, in folders. The backgrounds were still there. It was just a treasure trove of memorabilia. And then you could go down the hall, and there was the editing rooms, and the moviolas, the screens were like that big.
Oh, yeah.
And they
remember
looked like
those.
they were running on rubber bands. I mean, it was just the oldest moviola I had ever or have ever seen.
With all the belts. And
All the belts. Incredible. And he had a theater for watching dailies and stuff. And on one side was a gigantic, it was probably 3 feet by 5 feet, portrait oil painting of Woody Woodpecker on one side, and
Yeah.
Andy Panda was on the other side. I think they had been painted by Walter. And amazing history down there. And Walter would come up and visit us from time to time with his. He always wore a skipper's cap. I think he owned boats, and come by and just say hello and see what we were doing. And it was, for a young guy, that was really cool.
No.
And he had a loft. He had a loft. It took a separate staircase up, and that's where the ink and paint women were. And it was all skylights, so
Sure,
that they could
that
paint
makes
by
sense.
natural light. So that was very cool. So anyway, I stayed with Abe for 6 months. And during that time, I became an assistant. And I also animated my first ever thing for real. It was a Sesame Street spot that we found on YouTube.
So it's still there.
It's still there. It's unbelievable. And so he
Were you the only animator on that spot? Wow.
Yeah. So I got to animate, and when work got slow, he'd throw me in the editorial department, and I'd help out the editor. And when things got really slow, he'd send me on errands. So he kept me around for 10 straight months.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
Yeah, it was
So
fantastic.
we're getting on towards 75 at this point, right?
Yeah.
'Cause-
Yeah. Now, Abe had signed a deal with Richard Williams to be a lead animator on a feature called Raggedy Ann and Andy. But what no one knew other than Abe and his immediate family was that he had contracted terminal cancer.
Oh, that's too bad.
So before Raggedy Ann got up and going, Abe dies. And as he had gotten very sick, he brought in an old Disney story man
Yeah.
to take over running things, a guy named Milt Schaefer, who maybe you've
Sure.
heard of.
Oh, yeah.
So Milt was running things creatively. Ed Hansen was still, not Ed Hansen, Hansen, I can't remember what his first name was. Levito Hansen Phillips, yeah. Anyway, they were still running things, but at the end, they both wanted to retire. In fact, Milt Schaefer had already retired.
And came out.
Came out of retirement. So, anyway, Abe never works on Raggedy Ann, but before he dies, he lets Dick Williams know that I'm a really good assistant. And so Richard hires me right straight out, and they say, we'd like you to be an assistant to Art Babbitt on Raggedy Ann and Andy.
Okay.
So meanwhile, I'm still having lunches with Benny Washam every week. And of course I know who Art Babbitt is. Jesus Christ. And it's like, Art Babbitt, are you kidding me? I'm 23 years old and you want me to be Art Babbitt's assistant? So I remember we're on our way to Farmer's Market for lunch, and I said, Benny, It's Art Babbitt. Why would they choose me? He could have anybody he wanted, Retta Davidson, any of those people. He says, because no one else will do it.
And that's when you had a little dose of cold water.
Well, it was like, okay, I guess it's, but it's still Art Babbitt.
yeah, right. Oh, sure, yeah. Why
So
not?
we were all working out of our homes. There was no studio.
There's no studio?
No studio. All working out of our homes.
Charlie,
Hal Ambrose.
Charlie Downs was working
Charlie
out of his
Downs
house.
is working. Paulette Downs is working on it. Hal Ambrose is animating on it. John Kimball is animating on it. Richard was animating on it, which was a problem because he was supposed to be directing it. And Art Babbitt's animating on it. And then there was other animators. There was Emery Hawkins out of New Mexico was animating on it, and so
Yeah,
on and so
yeah,
forth.
yeah.
And Corny Cole's the art director. So I start working with Art. He's doing this character called the Camel with the Wrinkled Knees.
Sure.
And I'd say by the third visit to his house, he sits me down and tells me blow by blow about his nervous breakdown back in like 1959, something like that. Most depressing thing I've ever heard in my life. So I do his assistant work. I don't get a compliment. I don't think I even get a thank you. And it's pretty horrible work. I mean, it's just, for one thing, Corny Cole had designed this character, the camel.
And he was complex.
Well, he was brilliant. It was fabulous. And Art couldn't draw it. Couldn't draw it to save his life. So he flattened everything out. He simplified it to a point where he could draw it. It never once again looked like Corny's drawings. But, you paint it, and it's now the camel with the wrinkled knees. And Art's doing a good job with it. I mean, he could still animate, okay? But working for him is bringing me down. And
Why specifically? Just because did you have a lot of communication?
thankless. Every time you're with him, he's bitter about something. He's just got a downer personality. It's just like, you feel drained every time you're with him. You come out of there and it's like, put a gun to my head and take me out of my misery. So, Benny was keeping my morale up all the time. He's just, hang in there, Dave, hang in there, Dave. And
So you went over to Ben's for a little booster shot.
well, I was having lunch with him at least once a week. So, what I wanted from Babbitt was what I had wanted all along everywhere I worked. It's like, bring me along. Here's the great scholar, the great teacher, Art Babbitt. Teach me something.
But he wasn't teaching you anything?
He wasn't teaching
no
me
feedback.
squat.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah. So,
It's too bad.
I was very disillusioned with, this guy with this reputation. And I had even taken his class at the Union, and not getting anything. It's like, here's the work.
Was that sort of concurrent to working for him or before you worked for him?
What, when I took
When
the class?
you took the class?
Maybe the same time, maybe a little before.
Yeah.
Somewhere close, pretty close.
But you thought his animation had merit.
Sure, it was working. Yeah, it was fine.
Did you have to bring the character back on model as his
No,
assistant?
had to draw it the way he drew it. Had to. You couldn't possibly put it back on model. He would have had a shit fit. So I wasn't learning anything, and I started going out to Corny Cole's house.
Yeah.
And Corny's showing me everything he's working on. It's so much fun. And he said, I'll give you a scene. Let me, give me a little time. I'll find you something you can animate. Art got word of it
Uh-oh.
and went crazy. Well, he didn't. He just was furious. He was furious. And he calls Carl Bell, who is the production manager on
Yeah.
Raggedy Ann and
Yeah.
And Carl and I were friends because we had gotten to know each other real well at Abe Levito's. And he says, "Don't you let Dave Block have it. Don't you give him anything to animate. You make sure that doesn't happen." And that
Well,
got
that's-
back to me.
Yeah.
And I've been working with Art for about 7 months, and we had completed the song, the big opening song with the Camel of the Wrinkled Knees. And I said, I quit. I'm out of here.
Joining all of the other assistant animators that won't work with it.
Well, it was a real gamble. I'm on a feature. I'm on a Richard Williams feature, big budget movie, and I'm quitting? Are you,
Yeah.
you know? But I was pretty impulsive in those days, and I'd been impulsive all the way up till now.
Yeah.
So I quit. And Benny said, come on back with me. Chuck is starting up a Carnival of the Animals thing with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Fantastic. He said, I'll take you on as a junior animator.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So I start on that, and I'm struggling. This is one funny story. I'm struggling. And Benny said, God, you're uptight. Loosen up. So Benny is of the old school. Benny drank his lunch. Benny held the record for number of martinis in a lunch hour at the Shack, which was 12.
Jeez.
And he never got out the door. He passed out. So Benny says, this is what I want you to do. You got a bar near your apartment? I said, yeah. It's the middle of the day. He says, I want you to go down there. What do you drink? I said, well, I can drink scotch. He says, I want you to have a couple. And then go and have them, go back to your desk, get home, into your apartment, and start animating again. So I do. And I have a couple, and I walk back to my apartment, and I start working on Daffy, and it's just flowing out of the pencil. It is just, I am like, I'm a house on fire. And I'm going, this is incredible. And I get to the end of the scene, and I just kind of walk over to the bed and fall on the bed, and I'm out.
Because 2 drinks did you?
Oh yeah, I was a teetotaler. So I get up later on, and I go back to my desk.
And you look at the stuff.
Made no sense whatsoever. The animation made no sense whatsoever. It was just a complete disaster, bust. So what ended up happening was Benny got ill, which would eventually end his life. He had health problems, and he had to step away from Carnival of the Animals. And if he stepped away, I had to step away.
Yeah.
So that's about to happen, and I get a call from. I forgot to mention, before I quit from Raggedy Ann and Andy, I had asked for a transfer. I had asked to be moved off of Art Babbitt's
The
work.
Art
That was
Babbitt
the
bandwagon.
final straw.
Then he really hated you.
Then he really hated me. No one takes themselves off unless he says they can take themselves off. So that was the last straw. And I went to work for a guy named Spencer Peale. Mm-hmm. Spencer Peale had been a directing animator for a industrial animation house over in Beverly Hills. I can't remember what the name of the studio was, but he was over there, and I had gone to work for him, and he loved me, but Art was determined to make my life miserable, and that's when I quit.
No, because he was from afar. He was still making your
He
life
was still
miserable.
still angry.
So I have one question.
Uh-huh.
What did you ever find out? What was Corny Cole's reaction to Art screwing up his model design on?
He was angry, but he was already getting angrier with everything. Dick was a loose cannon on the film.
Oh yeah.
And
had trouble finishing things. That
very
was.
much so, and Corny was definitely venting. I have this one layout that he did. It's a beautiful layout, and on it is lots of notes that he wrote, and at one point he called the production "dumb shit pictures," and he was really not happy. But he was going, it was just he was going along, and so anyway, I get the Carnival of the Animals thing ends, and I get a call from Raggedy Ann and Andy. Spencer's been asking for you. So I got to go back to Raggedy Ann and Andy with a raise, and no one bothered me after that. And the production moved, went forward, and they took a couple of selected assistants, me being one of them, and they flew us to New York for the last 6 months of the picture, and I got to meet that crew, the crew that was there.
New York crew.
The New York crew, the Tom Cetos and the Eric Goldbergs
Dan
and the Dan
Haskett.
Haskets, and I got to meet them, and Haskett and I got to be real good friends then. And Raggedy Ann came out and did its thing. And when that was over with, I went, well, I've done a feature. What's up from here? And the answer was Disney. Got to get into Disney.
So, how did you get into Disney? Did you apply? Did
Yeah.
they call you?
No. They don't call you. They never call you. So I had met Eric Larson in Chicago. He had actually visited my school
Oh, way back.
way back, and I had come out on one visit to California, and Eric had taken me to lunch at Disney, and I had actually met Ward Kimball during that lunch. So
Okay.
now I was trying to apply. Don Duckwall was the guy you had to get through. You go through.
I remember Donald.
Yeah.
He
So
was.
he was what he was.
He was a head administrator.
That's right. So it's now January of '77,
Okay.
and I'm trying to get into Disney. My first portfolios are rejected, and I knew.
Now they rejected your first portfolio, but that was before the feature work, wasn't it?
No, it was after Raggedy Ann. Literally, right after I was done with Raggedy Ann, I submitted a portfolio for the first time to Disney.
And they said, nah.
No good. So I worked on it, and I knew it was life drawing was the key, quick sketching was the key, and I also knew that Cal Arts, which had now gotten going, their first graduating class was coming out in June of '77. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I didn't know who they were, but the buzz was these were hot, these guys were good. And so I knew that if I didn't get into Disney before June, I might never get into Disney.
The strike zone would shrink.
Exactly. So I started, I actually submitted in February and got rejected. I submitted again in March, got rejected. Submitted again in April and got accepted.
Now, each time you got rejected, did they give you...
They actually did. They gave me some notes. Eric would do some drawings over my drawings, and I would get some input.
So that was helpful.
Really helpful. So April, I got in. Like April, beginning of April.
You beat the Cal Arts crew.
I did, and that was really important. So you go into Eric Larson's training program, which is 2 4-week periods
Sure.
where you do animation, and I did fine and got through the 8 weeks and got thrown into production. They knew I had previous experience, so the minute I got done with my first 2 tests, they threw me on Pete's Dragon, doing assistant work.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did Pete's Dragon.
Who
And
were you assisting? Do you remember? You're probably
Yes.
bouncing around.
Ron Clements. I did animation for Ron. I picked up on his work. I remember Ron more than anybody else.
Yeah.
And
Well, he was on his way to being a supervisor.
exactly. So I loved Eric Larson. Loved him. And a lot of the 9 old men were still there. Frank and Ollie were still animating. Ward was still doing some work, I think, over at Imagineering. He was
Yeah, he
still
was.
around.
Doing work for Epcot.
Wooly was still directing.
Yeah.
Milt had just retired.
Yeah, the previous summer.
Yeah. And but he would come around and just poke his head in and say funny things. And he was a much nicer person, I guess, once he retired than he was when he was there.
He told me once, he said, I didn't know him very much. I had a couple of lunches with him. because he came back and did stuff for the Black Cauldron. And he said to me, either in person or over the phone, he said, "I didn't retire, I quit."
He did. Yeah. He came to the Union right after he quit to show the footage he did of Medusa at the Rescuers. And I went and saw him. And I raised my hand when it came time for questions and answers. And I said, you know, your reputation is phenomenal, and everyone knows how great your work is. Who were the people you looked up to? You know, was it Frank and whose work did you respect? Is what I said. Mm-hmm. And he said, frankly, I never gave a damn about anybody else's work.
Yeah.
So that kind of summed it up.
Yeah, well,
He did like Mark Davis's work.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the thing
Yeah.
is, if you could catch him in a mellow mood, but I had more guys that were there in the 50s tell me you couldn't go in and get pointers from him because I think Bernie was the one that told me this. He'd say, "Just go and do it."
Uh-huh.
He'd try and start to explain, and he couldn't explain, and he'd throw the pencil and say, "Just go do it."
Right.
So he was not articulate in the ways of how to do it. He could only do it and maybe show you a little bit, but
Right.
explaining it, I don't think he could do it.
I'm going to digress for 1 second because I skipped over Benny Washam's being with Ben.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And some of the stories he would tell me about being at Warner Bros. I'll just tell you two, because they're the only ones I really remember well. You weren't allowed to bring food back to your office.
Oh,
Warner
at Termite
Bros.
Terrace?
Yeah, you weren't allowed to do that. So Leon Schlesinger was running the studio,
Yeah.
and one of the animators, I don't even know if Benny must have told me who it was, but I don't remember who it was. At night, came in and lined one of his drawers with stainless steel, and ran a current through it, so he could steam hot dogs in his desk. And it drove Leon Schlesinger crazy. He could smell it, but he could never find it.
He didn't know where it was.
So that was one thing that they tormented Leon with, which was pretty cool. And then the other one was Termite Terrace, at least in my mind, looked a lot like they had long hallways, just like the original animation building at on the lot, where there was a door at one end and another door at the other, and these long halls and then offices off the sides. And they drove Leon crazy one time, rolling a bowling ball down the thing, and you could hear it coming. It would go blah, 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 and it'd go right past his door. And by the time he would get up from his desk and come out, bowling ball would be out the other end. And that was another thing that I thought was pretty damn funny.
Yeah. Bud Hester told me a story about they used to torment Mark Davis in sort of the same way.
Yeah.
Mark his door would always be open to the office in the wing he was in.
Yeah.
And somebody'd walk down the hall, and he'd hear the footsteps, boom, 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 and he'd look up to see who it was going to be. They'd go by. Hi, maybe not. Just see who it is.
Sure.
So two of the puckish assistants, they'd sneak up. One would sneak up on one side of the door. And the other one, he'd walk up,
And stop.
and as soon as he stopped, the other one started, and
That's funny.
Mark would look up, hear the footsteps, and there'd be nobody, and he'd leap out of his desk, go to the door, and there'd be nobody there. And he said they purposely did that because they knew that he always looked up, and they knew it would drive him crazy. Footsteps coming up, going away, but there's nobody passing the door.
Wow. So anyway, getting back to Disney. So I get, I work on Pete's Dragon, and then Fox and the Hound is starting up,
Oh yeah.
and actually Small One
Oh,
was
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
training film, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. But the bottom line was that they asked me to animate on Small One, and I didn't. Oh, and Eric was supposed to direct it.
And then
Don Bluth muscled him out in a very, very backstabbing kind of way. And I just thought, I don't want the Small One to be my first animator's credit. wasn't really one of my better decisions because it got misinterpreted at Disney. They thought, well, maybe Dave doesn't want to be an animator. And that took me a long time to correct that. I eventually animated on Fox and the Hound, which is all I really wanted. But I felt that Eric had been betrayed by upper management.
Kind of split, actually, it did split the department. The department was kind of split.
Very much
There was
so.
a Cal Arts contingent and then the Bluth contingent.
Right, and I was on the Cal Arts side. I mean, I was sympathetic to them, and definitely not sympathetic towards Bluth. So I thought, Eric's been kicked off this project. Doesn't look very good to begin with. I don't want to be an animator on this project. So I just did assistant work on it, and it took. Eric didn't understand it at first, that I was just trying to be loyal to him. And so it took me about 6 months to get them to understand that I was being very idealistic. It wasn't that I didn't want to be an animator. I just didn't want to be an animator on that movie.
You didn't want that to be your premier project.
So ultimately, I did get to animate on Fox and the Hound. Worked out fine. I got my screen credit, and the rest.
So what did you concentrate on the Fox and the Hound? Did you move around, or did you do one
I
particular
kind of moved.
character?
Well, I started out focusing on the little fox, the young fox.
Sure.
And I did some scenes with the young dog, and then things actually when Don Bluth quit the studio and took those 13 people with him,
Yeah.
there was a greater demand for young animators, for people that were just
It sort of
cutting
opened
their
up the
teeth.
doors.
Sure did. And then I got more footage, and I did some of the hunter, I did some of the grown-up dog and fox, and started getting some better scenes, and that was a good thing. So I came off of Fox and the Hound, and there were 2 movies getting ready to go. One was The Black Cauldron, which everyone was so excited about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one was Mickey's Christmas Carol. So in those days, if you wanted to lobby for yourself, you did a personal test on your own time, working nights and weekends, and just to, because you weren't established yet, you weren't the Ron Clements or the John Pomeroys or that of that ilk. You had to sort of win them over that you could do something.
Sure.
So I did a test of the hero from Black Cauldron, and I went in to show it to the director, one of the directors who will remain nameless, and he looked at that and said, "Oh, that's much broader than anything we're going to be doing. We're going to go very realistic with this."
It was the Sleeping Beauty syndrome.
Yeah. So I came out of there, and I went, I got to get off this movie. I got to get onto Mickey's Christmas Carol. So I did get onto Mickey's Christmas Carol, and that was phenomenal. Oh God, what a blast! And I was among really great animators. Glenn was on it, Ed Gombert, Randy Cartwright, Mark Henn, Dale Bear. I was in a very select group of animators, and we had a great time, and the picture came out great, and it became kind of an annual event when that thing would show on TV. And more importantly, it kept us off of Black Cauldron for 2 years.
Yeah.
And that was fantastic, because that thing was going into the toilet real quick.
Yeah.
So Mark and I finished Mickey's Christmas Carol together and went on to Black Cauldron together. And we even went on to the same sequence together.
Yeah.
And
So what did you end up, because you still got it, because it
we
was
still got it,
going
but we
on.
got a decent character by Black Cauldron standards. We ended up doing this character named Fluter Flam.
Yeah, he was good.
He was a comic
Him
relief.
and Creeper were the 2 that were comic relief.
Right, and Gurgi was also comic relief. But anyway, we got this character, we worked on him, and we got off early to go work on Basil of Baker Street,
Yeah.
which became Great Mouse Detective. We got onto that early. And then they kicked us off the lot.
Oh, sure. You went over to Flower Street.
Flower
because
Street.
by then Michael and Jeffrey had arrived.
They had arrived,
Took
and they
over
were
the
kicking
animation
us,
building.
Exactly. So just as that was happening, I'm walking down the hallway of the original animation building. We're still there. And coming the other way is this guy named Michael Webster.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Webster had been a huge ad man in animation, and I had met him during my Abe Levito days.
Oh, because he was
He was an
animating
art director
commercials.
on commercials for the ad agency. And he remembered me, and he said, I just got here, and I'm putting together a new division. I'd like to talk to you. So I go in and talk to him, and he said, I'm looking for someone that I can get from feature animation. We're putting together Disney's first TV animation division. And I need someone with feature animation experience that I can send to Japan, because we're going to take over a studio in Japan, and they're going to produce our first TV show.
Yeah.
Are you interested? And we had just been kicked off the lot. Basil of Baker Street looked like Jeffrey Katzenberg was going to really foul it up. And morale was low.
Oh, yeah. It was really low, right?
Really
there.
low.
This had to be, you're talking about,
84.
was this 84
This was
or
84.
early 85?
84.
84?
End of 84.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm going, God, I'm going to become a supervising animator on Basil of Baker Street. But this is so exciting. This is a brand new division, to get in on the ground floor of a brand new division. And anyway, I took it.
Did you spend any time weighing the pros and cons, or did you just...
It's really stressful, because I couldn't tell features right away. You know, it was like, yeah, we're just starting this movie, and Dave Michener's going to give me the sequence to lead, and God, but I took the job, and
Did you do any animating at that time
I did.
on Basil?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did.
So you were on it for 4 or 5 months before?
Exactly.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Because I had gotten on it early. Me and Mark had gotten there early. So I went over there, and I designed most of the characters for our first show, which was
Gummy
called
Bears.
Gummy Bears. Yeah. I designed most of those characters, and then they sent me to Japan to oversee the entire production. And it was, creatively, it was unbelievable. I mean, I had never been in that position before, where I'm overseeing
You're promoted
everything.
real quick,
Oh yeah.
so you're
And
overseeing everything.
overseeing everything, and of course I had designed about 75% of the characters, so I really knew how to draw them. And now I'm finding out, what I found out over in Japan was that when you're at Disney Features, you don't know how good you are, because everybody's good. Everybody's really good. But getting over there to Japan and getting outside that building, my God, I found out how good I had become. And it was like, it just snowballed. It was like the Japanese would come with problems on how to animate this character, and I'd have maybe 2 hours to give to them at that point, because I was juggling so many things. And I go, well, let me see how much I can animate right now, you know. And by God, I would do it. And I go, Jesus, you know, it's like I got fast, especially when I'm not, you know, being nitpicked to death by, you know, every little.
Because you're the guy that's doing the nitpicking.
That's right.
You know, the other thing about that, because I knew an editor on the show, and he said they were real excited when the pencil test came back, because they were going, wow, this looks great, this is fab. Then when it went to color, they went, oh.
Right. We had problems in color. We had problems with the background, the guy who was head of backgrounds. And yeah, that did happen.
They thought that they were getting really high quality stuff, but by the time it got into color, it had sort of come down.
Absolutely. And that was partly my fault, because the color, because of the deadline, I didn't see much of the color. It went directly to LA. And, you know, the pencil test I was seeing all of. The color I saw very little of. And so, yeah, I took some heat for that. And it eventually got all straightened out, and the show became a big hit. And
So how long were you in Japan?
6 months. And yeah, came back, came back a hero and all this stuff, and I got promoted to director. I got to, I told him, I like being over there, but I don't want to go back. It's, my life just stops.
And this is before you were married, or
That's right. I wasn't married yet. I would get married soon after, but not yet. So I got, for all the success I had going over there, being the first guy and all that stuff, about 6 months later, I got promoted, got to direct on a series called DuckTales, which was a big, big hit for Disney TV animation.
And that's a big hit. What do you remember? Give me a couple of anecdotes about that, working on that thing, because now you're a director, so you're focused on other things than you were as the guy overseas.
Right, mainly storyboards. That was the big difference. Was all the storyboarding's done in L.A. and you work out your stories then. And I think the biggest adjustment is you're on a very tough schedule, and there's not a lot of room for error. So if a script should come up short in time, that's crazy time.
Right.
Because now you're up against it. There's no contingency time to, you have to. The writer's got to go home that night and write a few more pages, and then you got to
Now,
get
did
into
you
the
have input into
storyboard.
this? Were you there on top of the scripts, giving input?
Not yet. The scripts I had no control over. Only storyboards and how it's visually done, and so on and
Did
so
you have
forth.
much leeway to deviate from the script when you were?
You couldn't deviate at all. No.
Yeah.
I didn't get into that. After a year with DuckTales, I got to. After a year of DuckTales, I then did New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh with Carl Gears, and then I went back to Gummy Bears, which is what I wanted all along. Gummy Bears had become, just year after year after year, and I.
How many years did they do Gummy Bears?
6.
6. So
I
you kicked it off in Japan,
Right.
and then
I was away from it for 2, and then I came back to it for 3.
So you were okay. So you were on it initial season, and then seasons 4, 5, and 6.
As a director producer, and then I had control over everything, and I had gained enough experience to be good at that. Control over the scripts, control over the recording sessions, everything. And those were great. Those were 3 wonderful, wonderful years. I loved that show, and I still think it's a great show.
It's still playing somewhere in the world.
It is. It
Probably all the
actually
time.
is. It still plays in Europe. So I did that, and God, how long am I talking? I've been talking a long time.
You've been talking for 1 hour and 10 minutes.
Okay, I got to wrap this up.
So,
Somehow.
why don't we go until about 2:37, and
Jesus Christ, yeah. Okay.
then I will drive you back to your
Okay,
abode.
fair enough. So,
So
then
after
I
the Gummy
moved on to
Bears-
I moved on. We were creating Roger Rabbit. Roger Rabbit was now a big hit, and Gary Kreisel, who was the president of Disney TV Animation, wanted to rip that off and turn that into some kind of a TV show. So we came up with a character named Bonkers.
Yeah, I remember that.
And at that moment, as we were creating Bonkers, Michael Eisner bought an animation studio in Paris from 2 guys called the Brizzi Brothers.
Yeah.
They bought them and had nothing for them to do. It's like,
Unfortunate.
unfortunately. So he goes to Gary Kreisel and he says, bought a studio, got nothing for them to do. You gotta give me something for them to do. He didn't go to features, he went to TV.
Because he knew they can crank it out fast.
Right. So Gary Kreisel comes to us and says, we got this character named Bonkers. First person who comes up with a premise for a theatrical short, will do it. So went home, came up with a pitch, went in and pitched it to Gary. He said, great, that's what we're gonna do. So we boarded it,
Yeah.
we did our thing. I went over to Paris and we produced it, and it came out, and no one saw it. It came out with one of their lesser live action films, and it did its thing, but it's probably one of the most forgotten theatrical shorts.
Not
that's-
on YouTube?
No, it's not.
Oh, everything else is.
There's a piece of it, and right now, actually, it features animation. They're digging it up for me. So I did that, and then we made it into a series, and it did okay. It was all right. But
I always thought the problem with Bonkers, because I remember talking this over with people over there at the time, it's like a cartoon character with real people, but the real people are cartoon characters.
So it couldn't work.
The whole premise doesn't
it
work.
couldn't work.
It would work if they were live action.
Exactly. That was
it's
it.
it's
That's
just-
exactly what was wrong with Bonkers.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It was just, it wasn't that the concept was wrong. It's just you can't execute it. You can't have a cartoon in a cartoon
That's
when the
right.
gag is
You got
cartoon
it,
live
Steve.
action.
That's exactly right.
And as soon as I saw that, I went, well, that's your problem
Exactly.
because you don't know. There's no dividing line. It's you don't know what you're looking at.
That's exactly right.
So
So-
then you went back to features.
Then I went back to features. Yes, I did. I went back for Hercules. I had a fabulous time on Hercules, and I stayed there for Hercules and Tarzan and Emperor's New Groove and up through
You worked on actually
Treasure Planet.
the first three you named, I think are the best later of the '90s Disney
Hmm.
features. And I mean, what do you do on Emperor's New Groove?
Kronk. I
Oh,
animated
that's
on
great.
Kronk.
That's because you know something. I think that's one of their better animated features, and of course, the legend is Michael Eisner hated it and tried to bury it, and it still made quite a bit of money, even though
Right.
he didn't want it to make a lot of money.
And then the history behind it is so interesting because it was
Oh,
supposed
yeah.
to be Empire
Part
of
of
the
the
Sun, and Trudy Stiles, Sting's wife, made this incredible movie called Sweatbox.
Oh, I've seen that.
And it's fabulous because she caught it all. She got it all on film, and then it's a fascinating film. It really is of what can go wrong.
I really think Mark Dindal really pulled something out, though, because I think
He did.
it turned into a really
a
pretty
fun
good
film, and I had a good time working on it. So I've worked through Treasure Planet, and then things started to implode. Things had already started imploding with 2D. After Treasure Planet would be Home on the Range, and that would be the end of it. So I got laid off, and I went back to Disney DVD division.
What's
No,
now-
I went back to TV. I went back to TV and directed Kim Possible for a season,
Oh yeah, one of their
which
big
was a
hits.
great show. Great
It
show.
went on forever.
Yes, it did. And I did their second season, and then I moved into the DVD division, and I directed some things there.
You did the Princess series,
I did. That's right.
and I think you did some other stuff there too, didn't you? Or
I was
an
an animation supervisor on some of their other ones. I worked on Kronk's New Groove and 101 one of the 101 Dalmatians DVDs.
So you were a director on that?
I was a animation director on those two, and then I directed the Princess
Right.
series.
And then you went over to Warner Brothers.
I went over to Warner Brothers and
you
directed
directed a direct-to-video feature over there.
a Scooby-Doo musical.
So you've stayed busy.
Yeah,
straight
and I'm
through.
back with this. Well, for the most, yeah, I've done all right. And I'm back with Disney now, working for Dave Bossert in special projects, working on a large variety of things. And Bossert's a great guy to work with. And that pretty much sums
So
up
I
my
have
career.
one question to end with, and then I do a version of this. What are your of all of the stuff that you've worked on over the course of 40 years? Name the top three that you think, and maybe take it from the point of view that you think has had the most impact, not the one that you enjoyed the most, because what you enjoy isn't necessarily the one that has the most
Well.
impact.
Wait. You mean on our business?
Well, just on business culture. I mean, because you directed and souped on a lot of groundbreaking Disney television shows, and you were also on a whole lot of features.
Well,
and
all right.
you were on Richard Williams' crew, so
Gummy Bears really set the bar very high for TV animation. I remember when I got back from Japan getting a lot of calls from people saying, how the hell did you pull that animation off? How did you do that? And it was because there had been real rigid rules that Hanna-Barbera had set up for how to do TV animation, and I hadn't used any of them.
you were going from the feature playbook.
I was going from the feature playbook, and I saw what the playbook was for Hanna-Barbera, and I knew what that produced. So I expanded on it a lot. I was literally reinventing the wheel for what we were doing. And, whereas they had mouth charts, A, B, C, D.
Right.
That was it. It stopped at D.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's not going to cut it. So I expanded it a lot. And I think we had, instead of the 4, we had 10. Because we were still working with people who didn't speak English. So you had to come up with
Make it more nuanced.
Exactly. And the acting had to be greater, the silhouette, just taking the principles that Eric Larson had taught me and bringing that to Japan. And those artists over there, God, we got along great. I mean, they knew I was there with them in the trenches, and that if they let me, I could teach them a lot.
Did you have a translator?
All the time.
Yeah.
Every minute I was in that studio, and it was a simultaneous translator, so they're talking just one word behind you the whole time, which is an interesting
made it fairly
experience.
transparent.
Yeah. So that had a big impact.
So that would be one. 2 more.
Oh God.
How about on the feature side?
Impact?
Of all the features that you worked on, because
Well,
I think, for instance, Tarzan was really their big hit.
It was.
Late in the '90s, which is probably their last really big hit.
I didn't. I
Hand
worked
drawn.
on Tarzan, but Tarzan and Empire in the Sun were being done simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I did go on to Tarzan immediately after Hercules, but I got promoted to supervising animator on Empire in the Sun.
Yeah.
And so I only worked on Tarzan at the very beginning, and at the very end, when they had crunch, what happened was Kevin Lima, who's a great guy, great director, he wanted me on Tarzan. Then I got promoted, and he couldn't keep me because I went on to Empire in the Sun. When Empire in the Sun went down, when the whole thing collapsed, and they went back, and then Kevin pulled me back to Tarzan, and I worked at the very end of Tarzan.
What characters did you work on?
Professor Porter,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and the baboon sequence where Jane meets Tarzan, and those were the 2 areas that I worked on. So I was really glad to have a contribution to that film and have my name on it, because Tarzan's terrific, just a terrific.
Oh, it's a
film.
terrific film.
Yeah.
Terrific film. Deep focus canvas, some of Glenn Keane's great stuff.
Absolutely. And, and Kronk's New Groove was fun because I did a lion's share of Kronk. I did a lot of Kronk in that film, and I got great stuff to work on, and it brought me up. On Hercules, I'd worked on Pegasus, but Kronk was just so much fun, and I got really, really great scenes to do with him. So that was a progression for me.
Yeah.
So there. Other than that, I don't know what else to tell you.
I think we've
I've certainly talked a long time.
done the yin and the yang.
Okay.
So, okay, well, thank you, Mr. Block. Thank you for doing this.